Victor Harlow was a man whose name carried weight in the small coastal town of Brighton Cove. Everyone knew him. Everyone spoke of him. But not with admiration, rather, with fear and caution. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and made silence fall, not because people respected him, but because they dreaded what he might say or do next. Victor was a millionaire who had built his fortune in shipping and real estate. His money gave him power, and he wielded that power like a weapon. To him, wealth was not only a tool for business but also a shield against consequences. If he shouted at someone, they would stay quiet. If he insulted them, they would bow their heads. And if he demanded something unreasonable, they would still obey. It had been this way for years. The people of Brighton Cove had grown used to his presence. Shopkeepers offered him the best goods, even if it meant losing profit. The mayor never crossed him, fearing he might pull out his donations. Ordinary families whispered stories about him, warning their children to stay out of his path. And the staff at the town's finest restaurant, the Pearl, felt the weight of his shadow most of all. The Pearl was Victor's favorite place. Not because he loved the food, but because he loved the stage it gave him. He would sit at his usual corner table, wearing his tailored suits, watching people with cold eyes as if they existed only for his amusement. Whenever he arrived, the entire staff would stiffen. Chefs would double-check every dish. Waiters would whisper instructions to each other, afraid to make the smallest mistake. Victor thrived on this fear. It made him feel important. He often came alone, though sometimes he brought guests, business partners, politicians, or people he wanted to impress. Yet no matter who sat across from him, the rhythm was always the same. He would raise his glass, make a sarcastic remark, and wait for everyone to laugh at his cruel humor. If no one laughed, his sharp tongue would slice deeper. It wasn't that Victor enjoyed food. He enjoyed control. On one crisp autumn evening, the Pearl was glowing with golden lights as people gathered for dinner. The sound of soft piano music floated in the background, and candles flickered on polished tables. Guests spoke in low, comfortable voices, enjoying their meals. But the moment the door opened and Victor Harlow stepped inside, the air shifted. Heads turned quickly and then turned away. Conversations dropped to whispers. The staff straightened, each one silently praying not to be assigned to his table that night. Victor moved slowly, confidently, like a king surveying his kingdom. His silver cufflinks caught the light, and his leather shoes tapped against the floor with an almost deliberate echo. His eyes scanned the room, cold and sharp, daring anyone to hold his gaze. No one did. "Mr. Harlow," the maitre d' greeted with forced cheer, bowing slightly. "Your table is ready." Victor didn't respond with thanks. He never did. He simply adjusted his tie and walked to his corner seat, the same one he always demanded. The waiter assigned to him that evening was already sweating, his hands trembling as he carried a menu. Everyone knew Victor never really read menus, he preferred to criticize them. "Good evening, sir," the waiter said, voice shaky. Victor's lips curved into a smirk. He looked the man up and down before speaking. "Good evening. We shall see if it is good, won't we?" The waiter nodded quickly, lowering his eyes. That was the way people behaved around Victor. That was the way it had always been. The other diners pretended not to notice, but they were listening. They always listened. It was impossible not to. Victor's voice was like thunder in the quiet restaurant. He seemed to enjoy being overheard. His cruel words were part of the performance, as if he needed everyone to witness his power. The night went on as expected. Victor complained about the bread. He mocked the wine. He criticized the decor, though it hadn't changed in years. Nothing pleased him because being pleased wasn't the point. The point was control. For years, no one had dared to challenge him. No one had raised their voice in his presence. No one had told him no. Victor Harlow's shadow stretched far across Brighton Cove, and most people believed it would remain that way forever. But what no one knew that night was that change was already on the horizon. A new face had joined the Pearl's staff. She was different in ways that Victor had never encountered before. She was not dazzled by wealth, nor broken by arrogance. She carried herself with quiet strength, and she would soon prove that even the loudest voice could be silenced by calm courage. The town did not yet know her name. The guests that night did not notice her moving between the tables, learning her new steps, and adjusting to her new role. But soon, everyone in Brighton Cove would know who she was. And Victor Harlow, the man everyone feared, would learn that his reign of intimidation was nearing its end. For now, though, the stage was set, and the shadow of power loomed over the Pearl like a storm waiting to break. The Pearl had always been a place of elegance. With its polished wooden floors, shining glass chandeliers, and walls painted in soft cream, it looked like a restaurant made for royalty. But behind its beautiful dining hall, the staff lived in a different world, a world of rushing feet, whispered worries, and silent fears of making mistakes in front of powerful guests. When Maya arrived, she carried only a small bag, a folded resume, and a heart full of determination. She was not from Brighton Cove. She had grown up miles away, in a quiet town where her family had lived simple lives. After finishing school, Maya had worked in small diners and cafes, moving from one job to another. Life had not been easy, but she had learned to smile through it. She had learned to be strong. When she saw the job opening at the Pearl, she almost didn't apply. People told her it was the most demanding place to work, and that the staff were always tense because of one customer, Victor Harlow. They said no one lasted long there. But Maya needed the job. She needed the income to support her younger brother, who was still in school, and her mother, who was unwell. So she told herself she would try. She believed that no matter how hard the work was, she could manage it with patience and courage. On her first day, Maya wore a simple uniform of black and white. The black apron felt stiff against her waist, and the white shirt made her shoulders look sharper than they were. She tied her hair neatly, pinned back the strands that fell in front of her face, and looked at herself in the mirror. Her dark skin glowed softly under the light, her brown eyes steady, her lips set in a calm smile. She whispered to her reflection, "You can do this." The manager of the Pearl, Mr. Daniels, was a serious man with gray hair and a constant frown. He had seen many new workers come and go, and he doubted Maya would be any different. Still, he gave her a chance. "You'll shadow the other staff tonight," he told her. "Just watch and learn. And remember, never upset Mr. Harlow." Maya nodded politely. She had already heard the stories, but she didn't allow fear to take root in her heart. To her, every person was just a person, no matter how much money they had. That evening, as the restaurant filled with guests, Maya carried trays of bread, poured glasses of water, and wrote down orders with neat handwriting. She moved with quiet grace, her steps steady, her voice soft but clear. The senior waiters noticed her calmness. Some of them smiled at her, whispering, "You're doing well," while others shook their heads, thinking, "She has no idea what's coming." And then Victor Harlow walked in. Maya didn't recognize him at first. To her, he was just another customer in an expensive suit. But she quickly noticed how the atmosphere shifted. The laughter of the guests faded. The staff stood straighter. The pianist's fingers even slowed on the keys. All eyes, without trying, turned toward him. Maya watched him from the side as he walked to his corner table. His steps were heavy with pride, his chin lifted like a man who owned not just the restaurant, but the whole town. She noticed how the waiter serving him was already sweating. She noticed how the manager's face grew pale. She wondered, who is this man who makes everyone so afraid? The answer came when one of the waitresses whispered quietly near her ear. "That's him. That's Victor Harlow." Don't ever look him in the eye too long. And if he mocks you, just keep quiet. It's safer that way. Maya listened but did not reply. She simply carried her tray to another table, her mind turning. She thought of her mother, who had taught her that no one in this world was above another. She thought of her younger brother, who looked up to her for guidance. And she thought of the many customers she had served in the past, some kind, some rude, but all just human. The night moved on, and Maya kept to herself, learning the patterns of the restaurant. She saw how Victor treated the staff. He snapped his fingers at them. He mocked their mistakes. He spoke as if they were less than him. Some guests lowered their heads, pretending not to hear. Others laughed nervously, hoping to stay on his good side. But Maya did not laugh. She did not lower her eyes. She carried her tray past him, her step steady, her face calm. For a moment, Victor glanced at her. Their eyes met. His gaze was sharp, almost daring her to look away. But she didn't. She held his stare for just a second longer than most dared, and then she turned her attention back to her work. That simple act, so small and natural, was enough to unsettle him. He was used to fear. He was used to silence. But this new waitress, this young woman with gentle eyes and steady steps, had not bowed her head. Victor smirked, though a flicker of annoyance passed through his expression. He thought, she'll learn soon enough. But what he didn't know was that Maya was not like the others. She had faced struggles far harder than a man with money and arrogance. And she would soon show Brighton Cove that fear could be broken, not with anger, but with calm strength. That night, Maya returned home tired but not discouraged. She placed the tips she had earned into a small jar, sat by her mother's bedside, and told her about the grand restaurant with chandeliers and piano music. Her mother smiled weakly, whispering, "I'm proud of you." Maya held her hand and smiled back. She didn't know exactly how, but deep inside, she felt that her life in Brighton Cove was about to change. She could sense it, like the air before a storm. And soon, the storm would come not for her, but for Victor Harlow, the man who had ruled the town with fear for too long. The second week of Maya's job at the Pearl began quietly. She had learned the rhythm of the restaurant, the rush of orders, the clinking of glasses, the way waiters moved like dancers to keep the floor smooth and calm. Every night she grew more confident, her tray balanced with ease, her smile steady and genuine. Some guests even began to notice her kindness, thanking her for her attentive service. But among the staff, a quiet tension still remained. It was the same tension that always lived in the Pearl, like a hidden thread stitched into the walls. The reason had only one name: Victor Harlow. That evening, the restaurant was busier than usual. The tables were filled with couples, families, and business groups. The air carried the warm smell of roasted lamb, garlic butter, and fresh bread. The pianist played gentle notes that mixed with soft conversation. It was a night that could have been perfect until the door opened, and Victor Harlow stepped inside. The silence was almost instant. A family at the front table lowered their voices. The waiters stiffened. The maitre d' hurried forward with a nervous smile. "Mr. Harlow," he said quickly, "your table is ready." Victor nodded, his eyes sweeping the room with sharp judgment. He wore a dark gray suit, his gold watch shining beneath the chandelier light. His steps were confident, and his presence felt heavy, as though he carried the power to control the entire room. Maya noticed the change in atmosphere immediately. It was impossible not to. She watched as the waiter assigned to Victor fumbled with his pen, his hands trembling before he even reached the table. The man's fear was almost visible, and Maya felt a deep sadness for him. She continued her work, serving other guests with calm efficiency. But her path soon crossed with Victor's table. Victor was in one of his usual moods, sharp, restless, eager to make others uncomfortable. He looked at the menu for only a moment before tossing it aside. "Your food grows worse every season," he said loudly, his voice cutting through the air. Do the chefs not know how to cook anymore? The waiter stammered something about the quality of the ingredients, but Victor waved him off with a cold laugh. Then his eyes landed on Maya. She had just passed by, carrying a tray of drinks to another table. Victor leaned back in his chair, his gaze following her. And who is this? He asked, his tone mocking. A new face? They must be desperate if they're hiring anyone off the street now. The waiter froze. The guests nearby went silent, pretending not to hear, though every ear was tuned to his words. Maya felt her chest tighten, but she did not falter. She placed the drinks on her guest's table, thanked them politely, and turned. When she met Victor's eyes, she did not look away. Yes, she said calmly, her voice clear but gentle. I am new here. Her words carried no anger, no fear, just honesty. Victor raised an eyebrow, surprised by her steadiness. Do you know who I am? He asked, his tone dripping with arrogance. Maya kept her hands folded neatly in front of her apron. You are a guest, sir. And I am here to serve you, like any other guest. The words were simple, polite, but they carried weight. The diners nearby shifted in their seats, their curiosity rising. No one had ever spoken to Victor like that, not without trembling, not without breaking under his glare. Victor's smirk flickered. For a moment, he looked almost unsettled. But his pride would not let him stay quiet. A guest, he repeated, his voice louder now. You think I am just a guest? Do you have any idea how much money I put into this restaurant? Into this town? Without me, this place wouldn't even exist. The waiter looked ready to collapse. The manager, standing across the room, began to move forward nervously, but Maya spoke before he could intervene. With respect, sir, she said, her voice calm but firm, a restaurant exists because of many people. The chefs, the servers, the cleaners, the guests who come to eat. Everyone plays a part. Money can buy a seat, but it cannot buy respect. The room froze. Every guest, every waiter, even the pianist paused, his fingers hovering over the keys. It was as if the entire restaurant was holding its breath. Victor stared at her, stunned. His lips parted as if to reply, but no words came. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to him directly, without fear, without trembling, without surrender. Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't insult him. She simply stood there, steady as a stone, her eyes calm and unwavering. And in that silence, Victor felt something he had not felt in a very long time, the sting of truth. At last, he gave a short, cold laugh. Interesting, he muttered, his tone sharp but weaker than before. He picked up his glass of wine, though his hand trembled slightly, and drank. We'll see how long you last here. Maya inclined her head politely. As long as I need to, sir. Then she turned and walked away, leaving the room buzzing with unspoken thoughts. The guests exchanged glances. Some smiled faintly, others looked shocked, but all of them felt the same thing: they had witnessed something rare, something powerful. For the first time in years, someone had stood up to Victor Harlow. And though Victor tried to act unbothered, the truth was clear in his eyes. The control he once held so easily was beginning to crack. That night, whispers spread through Brighton Cove. People told the story of the new waitress who had dared to silence the millionaire, if only for a moment. They spoke of her calm voice, her steady gaze, and her words that carried more weight than money ever could. Maya, meanwhile, returned home tired but thoughtful. She had not planned to confront him. She had only spoken what she believed to be true. But she did not realize that her courage had already begun to change the air in Brighton Cove. For the first time, people saw that Victor Harlow was not untouchable. And for the first time, Victor himself began to feel the weakness of fear, not in others, but in his own heart. The days that followed the first clash between Maya and Victor Harlow felt different inside the Pearl. Something invisible had shifted in the air. The staff whispered about it in the kitchen, their voices low but filled with wonder. "Did you see her face? She didn't even flinch. She spoke like he was no one special. No one has ever done that before." The waiters, who had once bowed their heads and accepted Victor's sharp words, now found themselves replaying Maya's calm voice in their minds. It gave them strength, though they were too cautious to admit it out loud. Maya, however, did not think of herself as brave. She did not tell anyone about what had happened, not even her mother. To her, she had only spoken the truth. She did not want praise, and she did not want attention. She only wanted to do her work with honesty. But Victor Harlow was not a man who forgot. On the third evening after their clash, he returned to the Pearl. As always, his entrance caused the same reaction: lowered voices, stiff backs, nervous glances. But now, there was something new to curiosity. The diners and staff alike wanted to see what would happen when he faced Maya again. Victor walked to his corner table, his shoes tapping loudly on the floor. He looked around the room with sharp eyes, searching. And when he saw Maya moving gracefully with a tray in her hands, his lips curved into a thin smile. He called for her. Not politely, not gently, but with a commanding tone that carried across the restaurant. "You. Waitress. Come here." The tray in Maya's hand belonged to another table. She finished serving them first, thanking the guests politely, before turning toward Victor's table. She walked with her usual calm, her back straight, her step steady. When she stopped before him, she folded her hands neatly in front of her apron and said, "Good evening, sir. What would you like tonight?" Victor leaned back in his chair, his expression full of challenge. "What would I like? I would like to know if you've learned your place yet." The words dropped into the quiet restaurant like stones into still water. The staff froze. The diners turned their heads slightly, pretending not to watch, but their eyes stayed fixed on the scene. Maya's face did not change. Her voice remained steady. "My place, sir, is to serve you food with respect. And your place is to accept it with the same respect. Nothing more, nothing less." A hush fell over the restaurant. Victor chuckled, though there was no humor in the sound. "You speak as if you are equal to me." Maya tilted her head slightly. "We are all equal, sir. Money may change the size of a house, or the clothes someone wears. But it cannot change the value of a person." The words were soft, but they struck harder than any shout. People at the nearby tables leaned closer, their hearts racing. No one had ever spoken such truths to Victor Harlow. Victor's smile faded. He picked up his glass of wine and swirled it slowly, his eyes fixed on her. "You speak boldly. Do you think boldness will keep you employed here? Do you think these people will protect you when I decide you don't belong?" For a moment, fear touched the edges of the room again. The staff shifted nervously. The manager wrung his hands from across the floor. But Maya did not step back. Her voice remained calm, like a steady river. "I do not need protection, sir. I only need to do what is right. And what is right is to treat every person with dignity. Even you." Those last two words, "even you," hung in the air like a quiet bell. Victor's hand tightened around his glass. For the first time, his eyes wavered. He was not used to this. He was not used to being told the truth in front of others. He had always believed his money could silence voices. But here was a young woman, standing before him with no wealth, no power, and no fear, and she was silencing him. He wanted to snap back. He wanted to laugh, to insult her, to remind her of his influence. But the words caught in his throat. Every phrase he thought of sounded weak against her calm strength. The diners felt it too. They looked at Maya with admiration, and at Victor with something close to pity. The man who had once controlled every room now seemed smaller, his power slipping through his fingers like sand. At last, Victor placed his glass down and leaned forward. "You are clever with words," he said coldly. "But words do not last. People forget." Maya's lips curved into a small, quiet smile. "Sometimes, sir, the simplest words are the ones people remember forever." The pianist's music began again, soft and slow, as if even he had been waiting for the exchange to end. Conversations resumed in low voices, though the air was no longer heavy with fear. It was lighter now, touched by something new, hope. Victor leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. But inside, his chest burned with a mixture of anger and something far more dangerous, doubt. For the first time in years, he doubted his control. Maya walked away, her steps unshaken. She returned to her work as if nothing unusual had happened. She smiled at a young couple, poured water for an elderly man, and carried plates with steady hands. She did not look back at Victor, because she did not need to. The diners whispered among themselves. She silenced him again. She didn't even raise her voice. "She's not afraid." That night, when Maya returned home, her mother asked how her shift had been. Maya smiled softly, tucking the day's earnings into the jar on the shelf. "It was busy," she said simply. She did not speak of Victor, or of her words, or of the silence that had followed. She believed those moments belonged to everyone who had witnessed them. And in Brighton Cove, whispers spread even further. People who had once spoken Victor's name with fear now spoke of Maya's calm courage with awe. They began to believe that perhaps the shadow of power could be broken not by anger, not by shouting, but by an unshakable voice that refused to bow. Brighton Cove had always lived under a quiet shadow. For years, people carried on with their lives while silently accepting Victor Harlow's power. He was not just a wealthy man, he was the man everyone avoided crossing. His name carried weight in the market, in the mayor's office, and even in the homes of ordinary families. Parents told their children, "Stay out of his way. Do not speak back. It is safer." But after Maya spoke to him once, then twice, the town began to change. The story spread first inside the Pearl. The staff whispered it while polishing glasses and folding napkins. Guests who had seen the exchange retold it at their dinner tables and in their shops the next day. And soon, everyone in Brighton Cove knew about the new waitress who had looked Victor Harlow in the eye and spoken truth without fear. At first, people did not believe it. "No one talks to Victor like that," they said. "She must be foolish. She will lose her job." But when more and more witnesses confirmed the story, disbelief turned into surprise, and surprise turned into admiration. In the marketplace, shopkeepers spoke of her bravery as they weighed vegetables on their scales. "Did you hear about Maya?" one woman asked. "She told him money cannot buy respect." Another replied, "Imagine saying such words right in front of everyone." Their voices carried a new kind of excitement, a spark that Brighton Cove had not felt in years. Even in the mayor's office, whispers spread. One council member asked another, "If a young waitress can stand against him, why do we still bend so easily?" The question lingered, uncomfortable yet powerful. Meanwhile, at the Pearl, the staff began to feel a difference inside themselves. They still moved carefully around Victor when he visited, but the fear was weaker now. Some even allowed themselves to smile when Maya entered the room. She had become a quiet source of strength, not because she shouted or fought, but because she had shown that courage could exist in calmness. Maya herself did not see it this way. To her, she had only done what her heart told her was right. She did not seek to be noticed, nor did she wish to be the center of gossip. Every night, she walked home with tired feet and tucked her earnings into the jar for her family. But wherever she went, people's eyes followed her not with judgment, but with respect. One afternoon, as she walked through the town square to buy medicine for her mother, an elderly woman stopped her. "You are Maya, aren't you?" the woman asked, her wrinkled hands clutching a small basket. "Yes," Maya answered politely. The woman's eyes glistened. "Bless you, child. You gave us all a gift. For years we have bowed our heads, too afraid to speak. But you reminded us that he is only a man." Maya smiled gently and bowed her head in thanks, though she did not know what to say. She had never thought of herself as a gift to anyone. At the same time, Victor Harlow felt the shift as well. He noticed the way people looked at him now, not with the same trembling respect, but with something else. Some looked at him cautiously, some curiously, and some even with hidden defiance. He had not changed, but the way people saw him had. It unsettled him deeply. At his office, his assistants whispered behind his back. At the golf club, his friends laughed less at his jokes. And at the Pearl, he could feel the staff standing straighter, their eyes no longer filled with the same fear. Victor's pride burned. He told himself it was nothing. "It's a passing story," he muttered. "People will forget." But when he closed his eyes at night, he saw Maya's steady gaze. He heard her calm words. And he realized that forgetting would not come easily. Back at the Pearl, the other waiters began to change as well. When Victor snapped his fingers, one of them, usually too nervous to speak, now replied firmly, "Yes, sir, one moment please," without stumbling. When he mocked the food, the chef muttered under his breath, "It is made with care, and that is enough." It was small, but it was new. Maya had not told them to do this. She had not led them or asked for their courage. Yet her example had planted something in their hearts, and it was beginning to grow. That evening, as Maya polished glasses at the counter, her colleague Sarah leaned closer and whispered, "Do you realize what you've done?" Maya looked at her, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "You gave people hope," Sarah said softly. "For the first time, we are not afraid to breathe when he is around. For the first time, we feel like we matter." Maya lowered her eyes, humbled by the words. She did not feel like a hero. She was only trying to live with dignity. But she could not deny that something was happening, not just inside the restaurant, but across the entire town. Brighton Cove, once covered in silence, was beginning to awaken. People were starting to believe that perhaps they did not need to bow to Victor Harlow anymore. Perhaps they had the power to stand tall. And though Maya did not yet see the full picture, the truth was clear: her courage had become a spark. And that spark had begun to spread like fire through the hearts of the people. The town that had once whispered in fear was now whispering something new: hope, courage, and the belief that even the most powerful man could be silenced by the simple voice of truth. Victor Harlow had built his life on control. For years, he had spoken, and people had listened. He had commanded, and people had obeyed. But now, in Brighton Cove, he felt his grip slipping. It was not loud, it was not dramatic, it was quiet, like sand falling through his fingers. And the cause of it all was one young waitress. Maya's words had traveled far beyond the Pearl. People repeated them in the marketplace, in their kitchens, and even on the docks where sailors worked. Money can buy a seat, but it cannot buy respect. We are all equal. Respect is earned. These simple phrases echoed everywhere, and no matter how Victor tried to ignore them, they followed him like shadows. The more he heard, the angrier he became. How could one woman, without wealth, without power, reduce him to whispers of doubt in his own town? He told himself she would break eventually. He told himself he only needed to push harder. And so, one evening, he returned to the Pearl with fire in his eyes. The restaurant was calm that night, its chandeliers glowing warmly, the pianist playing a slow tune. Guests laughed gently over their meals. But when Victor stepped in, the peace trembled. People looked up, expecting another storm. The staff braced themselves. Some looked nervous, others curious. And Maya, standing near the counter with her notepad in hand, lifted her chin slightly. Her heart beat steady, her face calm. She had already faced him twice. She was ready to face him again. Victor did not wait long. He called for her with a snap of his fingers. "Waitress." His voice was sharp, echoing across the room. Maya walked to his table, her steps steady. "Yes, sir," she said, her tone polite but firm. Victor leaned forward, his eyes cold. "Do you enjoy embarrassing me?" he asked loudly, his voice carrying to the nearby diners. "Do you enjoy making a fool out of the man who pays for half this town?" The restaurant froze. Forks paused midway to mouths. Glasses hovered in midair. Every eye turned toward them. Maya did not flinch. "I do not wish to embarrass anyone, sir," she replied. "But truth is not meant to make fools. Truth is meant to set people free." Gasps rippled through the room. People leaned closer, waiting for Victor's reply. His jaw tightened. "You think you are clever, don't you? You think your words are stronger than my power." Maya's voice stayed calm, almost gentle. "Power built on fear is weak, sir. It breaks the moment someone is not afraid." The words cut deeper than any insult. Victor's hand slammed against the table, rattling the glasses. "Enough," he shouted. His face flushed red, his pride burning under the weight of so many watching eyes. But even his anger did not silence the room this time. Instead, people looked at Maya. They looked at her strength, her calmness, her refusal to bow. And in their eyes, something new flickered: agreement. Maya stood tall, her voice unshaken. "You may silence others with fear, Mr. Harlow. But you cannot silence truth. It will always find its way, no matter how much money tries to cover it." The pianist's hands trembled on the keys but did not stop playing. The diners held their breath, their hearts pounding. Victor opened his mouth to speak, but the words would not come. He looked around and saw faces staring back at him, not with fear, but with judgment. For the first time, he realized the room was no longer his. The staff, who had once bowed their heads, now stood taller. The waiters no longer looked at him with trembling eyes. The guests no longer pretended to laugh at his cruel jokes. The silence in the restaurant was no longer his weapon, it belonged to Maya. Victor's chest heaved with fury, but beneath the anger was something else, something he did not recognize: weakness. Slowly, he leaned back in his chair, his pride forcing him to smirk though his voice was unsteady. "You speak well, girl," he muttered. "But words are wind. And wind passes." Maya met his eyes, calm as ever. "Then let the wind carry the truth, sir. It will travel farther than you imagine." The diners erupted into quiet applause. It was not loud, but it was enough. Hands clapped softly across the room, growing stronger as courage spread. The sound filled the air like the breaking of chains. Victor froze. Applause. For her. Against him. It was the moment he realized he was no longer feared in the way he once had been. His power had cracked, and everyone could see the pieces falling. That night, Victor finished his meal in silence, his face dark with unspoken rage. He left the Pearl without his usual smirk, his footsteps heavy. The whispers began before the door even closed behind him. Guests leaned toward one another. She stood her ground again. He had nothing left to say. She silenced him in front of everyone. Maya returned to her work quietly, not basking in the applause, not seeking attention. She served the remaining tables with her usual gentle smile. But in her heart, she felt the weight of the moment. She knew the town had seen something it would never forget. And Victor Harlow, the man who once ruled Brighton Cove with fear, had reached his breaking point. The weeks following Victor Harlow's breaking point at the Pearl were unlike anything Brighton Cove had experienced in years. The town seemed to breathe more freely. Shopkeepers no longer lowered their heads when Victor passed by. Children played near his parked cars without fear. Even the mayor, who had long deferred to Victor's will, began to speak with more confidence. But Victor himself did not speak. He stayed in his mansion, pacing long hallways lined with expensive paintings and heavy furniture. His wealth was still vast, yet it no longer held the power it once did. The echoes of Maya's calm voice haunted him. Power built on fear is weak. It breaks the moment someone is not afraid. Victor tried to regain control. He visited the Pearl again, as he had so many times before, intending to remind the staff who was in charge. But when he entered the restaurant, he was met with polite nods rather than trembling heads. Waiters moved gracefully, chefs worked without fear, and guests spoke freely among themselves. And there, behind the counter, stood Maya. She looked up and gave him a small, respectful nod. Victor cleared his throat. "Maya," he said, trying to sound commanding. "I need to speak with you." Maya's expression remained calm. "Of course, sir. How can I help you?" Victor's jaw tightened. For a moment, he tried to summon his old arrogance, his usual confidence that demanded obedience. But the words he wanted to use felt hollow. He realized that shouting, scolding, or snapping his fingers would no longer have the same effect. Instead, he sat at his usual corner table, quietly, and waited for Maya to take his order. For the first time, the dynamic was different. There was no fear. There was no tension. Only quiet respect and perhaps, deep down, the beginning of understanding. Maya took his order with her usual grace. "Your meal will be ready shortly, sir," she said, and walked away. Victor watched her move. He saw how she treated every guest with care, how she spoke with kindness, how she maintained calm in the midst of the bustling restaurant. And he realized something he had never understood before: true power does not come from wealth, fear, or control. True power comes from respect, courage, and integrity. That night, Victor left the Pearl without saying much. He drove through the quiet streets of Brighton Cove, thinking deeply about the events that had unfolded. He thought about how the town had begun to change not because of him, but because of a single voice that refused to bow. The following day, something remarkable happened. Victor called a meeting at his office, inviting the town council, business owners, and community leaders. For the first time in years, he did not use his wealth as a weapon. He did not demand obedience. He spoke openly, honestly, and without arrogance. "I have been wrong," he admitted, his voice steady but humble. "I believed fear could command respect. I was mistaken. It took someone with courage and honesty to show me the truth. I owe a debt to this town for the patience and strength of its people." The room fell silent. Council members exchanged surprised glances. Business owners murmured softly. For the first time, Victor Harlow admitted vulnerability. Meanwhile, at the Pearl, Maya continued her work as usual, unaware of Victor's meeting. She served meals, refilled glasses, and offered smiles to the diners. She did not seek attention or praise. Yet her influence stretched far beyond the restaurant walls. That evening, Victor returned to the Pearl not as a man commanding fear, but as a guest willing to be treated as an equal. He entered quietly, nodding to the staff. When Maya came to take his order, he spoke sincerely. "Thank you for reminding me of what truly matters," he said. Maya looked up, surprised, but she smiled gently. "Everyone has the ability to learn, sir. And everyone has the ability to change." Victor nodded. He realized that the town, once bound by his fear, was now moving forward stronger, more confident, and filled with hope. And he understood that he could either continue living in isolation, clinging to old ways, or embrace the lessons he had learned. Over the following months, Brighton Cove transformed. People spoke freely, worked openly, and helped one another without fear of reprisal. Businesses thrived, friendships strengthened, and the town became a community united by respect rather than trembling obedience. And through it all, Maya remained a quiet symbol of courage. She continued to serve at the Pearl, her heart humble and her spirit strong. People came not only for the food but for the warmth she brought to every interaction. Her presence reminded everyone that bravery did not require wealth, anger, or force, only honesty, dignity, and unwavering resolve. Victor Harlow, too, changed. He became a man who no longer ruled by fear but sought understanding. He invested in the town with intention, supported the community, and began to earn respect through kindness rather than intimidation. The millionaire who once silenced others through wealth and pride had learned the power of humility and truth. Brighton Cove flourished, and the story of the new waitress who dared to speak when no one else would was told for generations. Parents told their children about Maya, the girl who reminded the town that courage could topple the tallest shadow. And Victor Harlow, once feared by all, became a reminder that even the strongest need guidance, and that true power belongs to those who lead with respect, not fear. In the end, the town had awakened. And Maya, the quiet, brave young woman, had become the spark that lit the path for everyone, showing that one voice, calm and unshakable, could change an entire community.